That's what these men went through to teach us about hunger and what it meant in terms of the physical and mental and emotional health. It is overwhelming. When you're hungry, you can think of nothing but food. When they ended the experiment, or even during the experiment, one of the most popular foods was a potato. And if you look at Susan Holt's research, what you find is the potato is the most satisfying of all foods that people commonly eat. It's twice as satisfying as meat and cheese. It's 7 times as satisfying as a croissant. So potatoes were one of their favorite foods. Now, in this experiment, remember, they started out with 3 months of feeding them 3,200 calories, or the normal amount of food. And then they cut the calorie intake in half for 6 months. And then the third part of the experiment, the last 3 months of the experiments, were refeeding. And they refed slowly the participants so that they can adjust from starvation to fulfillment, except for 12 of the people. And what they did is they had these people eat as much as they wanted, no restriction, in the final 2 months of the starvation experiment. They told these men to eat as much as you want. And what they did is, because of the memory, the pain of starvation, is they overate and gained 10% more body weight than when they'd started. It's a period called hyperphagia. It happens in basically all starvation populations, is when food is suddenly available because of the memory of such painful hunger, is they overeat, getting ready for the next starvation. So people go through a hyperphagia syndrome where they can gain extra body weight. And this is relevant for something I'm going to talk about in just a minute. The hyperphagia only stopped when they corrected the free fatty mass, the muscles, the spleen, the liver. Those had to be brought back to their normal strength and size. Just replacing the body fat did not stop the hyperphagia. All right. The reason that it is important for you to understand this is because people will come to me and they will say, I follow your diet, or I started your diet and I gained weight. Well, this may be because you're in a hyperphagia state because of the memories you have of being hungry by dieting a lot. And so you may be in a chronic hyperphagia phase, going from one painful extreme to another. In other words, starving, dieting. In fact, there are books that talk about why diets make us fat, and they discuss this hyperphagia issue that goes on. But it ends. If you just stick it out, once the body catches up, then you go back to your trim normal body weight. So satisfying hunger is what we want to do, because when you're hungry, you can't think of anything but food. So how do you satisfy hunger? Well, one of the experiments, one type of experiment done, is they would feed different meals to participants, and they would ask them how they feel in terms of their hunger ratings, satiety index. They'd ask them how they feel. And when you feed high-fat foods, people remain hungry. It's carbohydrate that satisfies the hunger drive. And so you have, on a high carbohydrate, less hunger. The carbohydrate supplement, they said in this particular study, suppressed ratings of hunger, desire to eat, and prospective consumption or increased ratings of fullness. Whereas the fat supplement did not produce these kinds of effects. The body doesn't notice when you eat fat. It notices when you eat carbohydrate. And what it does is it then becomes satisfied. You stop being hungry if you eat carbohydrate, like the potatoes. Another kind of experiment done is they will feed different kinds of meals. Like in the first bar you see here, they're feeding what we call a normal breakfast. All right. And then they feed a high-fat breakfast, and then they feed a high-carbohydrate breakfast, and they watch how many servings that the participants take as a snack a couple hours later. And what they find is that the snack here, which is in the light gray area, the snack here is the same whether they eat a normal breakfast or whether they eat a high-fat breakfast. But the amount of snack that they took in was much less because they were satisfied by the carbohydrate. So there's another kind of experiments that's done to show that carbohydrate is what really satisfies the hunger drive. And you don't notice fat. And the third experiment done was by Lauren Lissner. And Lauren Lissner, what he did is he set it up on a metabolic ward where he had complete control over the foods. And what he did is he had his crew make stews and soups and muffins and breads and sandwiches and desserts. And what they did is they hid fat in these particular food items so that it was so well hidden, the people who were eating couldn't tell which were high fat and low fat. And they were told to eat to the full satisfaction of their hunger drive. And you see what happens if you look over to the right, you see at their calorie intake, how much they ate. If you fed them a high fat diet, they consumed 2,700 calories spontaneously without even noticing, just because the meals were 45 to 50% fat. But when they reduced the fat to 30 to 35% fat, again, the participants had no idea what the fat content was. They dropped their calorie intake spontaneously to 2,400 calories. And then when they decreased the fat intake to 15 to 20% fat, and the diet I recommend is 7% fat. When they decrease the calorie intake from fat to 15 to 20%, you see that they decrease their spontaneous consumption of food to 2,100 calories. In other words, without even knowing it, they cut 1,600 or 600 calories out of their diet without even noticing. Why? Because you don't notice the fat you eat, but you do notice the carbohydrate. So when you decrease the amount of fat in the meals, you increase the amount of carbohydrate, satisfies the hunger drive. So what you need to understand is that hunger is satisfied by sugar, carbohydrate. And when I say sugar, I'm talking about potatoes and rice and corn and beans and pastas and breads and sweet potatoes, starch. That's what I'm talking to you about. All right, there are three ways to answer the hunger drive. You can starve. You can starve before or after you have the bariatric surgery, which we're going to talk about. Or you can suppress the hunger drive by diet, and you can suppress it by drugs. Different ways of doing it and accomplish the same thing. You make the person sick. Or you can satisfy the hunger drive with foods that please. Those are your choices. As far as satisfying the hunger drive by dieting, sorry, folks. Excuse me. By dieting, what happens is you're hungry. I mean, you're so hungry. I've heard the statement: you'd eat the paint off the refrigerator. You're so hungry. And I'll tell you, I'm 76 years old, and you never learn to like being hungry. I don't care if you're 90. The pain of hunger is always going to be there. You can't train yourself to like to be hungry. It isn't necessary for your survival.